Hey everyone, welcome back to the Incredible India podcast series. I'm Sam, and with me, as always, is Taylor, our expert guide to context and connection.
Happy to be diving in.
So today we're doing something a little different. When you think of Goa, certain images just flash into your mind.
The coast, the churches.
Exactly. The beaches, the legacy of, the last 500 years? So our mission for this deep dive is to move inland. We want to get away from that familiar coastline and really go back in time.
Way back.
Yeah. Using the sources you shared with us to understand the foundational roots of Goan power and culture. Our focus is really Goa before all the European influence.
And that entire journey, it really starts and centers on one single, pretty unassuming place, Chandor.
Chandor.
Yeah, we've looked at the sources, and if Goa had a memory palace, a place that holds all the architecture of the deep past, Chandor would be its oldest, most fascinating room.
I like that framing, a memory palace, because if you look at Chandor today, it's just a quiet village.
It is.
Shaded lanes, these big stately homes. It doesn't scream epicenter of a major historical power. So why anchor this whole exploration here?
Well, that's the beauty of it, isn't it? Its quiet nature is deceptive.
Okay.
Beneath that calm, you have this incredible continuity of life, of governance and belief systems stretching back well over 1,000 years. It was once called Chandrapura.
Chandrapura.
The political and cultural heart of the region, under the really powerful Kadamba dynasty.
So the goal then is to use Chandor as a kind of tangible shortcut to understand how history here is layered.
Exactly. Not one period just violently replacing the next.
Right, which allows us to trace Goan identity from its deepest roots all the way up to the present.
Precisely. So let's unpack the logic that actually created this place.
Okay, let's start with power and strategy. Instinctively, we picture a capital city being this buzzing port.
Driven by trade.
Driven by all that lucrative coastal trade. And yet the Kadamba dynasty, which dominated the region from the 10th to the 14th centuries, they deliberately chose Chandrapura as their capital, and it's significantly inland. What was the ancient logic behind that choice? It feels counterintuitive.
It does, but what's fascinating here, and what the sources on peninsular history really confirm, is that capital cities in early medieval India, they rarely hugged the coast.
Really?
Yeah. They prioritized stability and defense over, immediate access to volatile maritime commerce. The Kadambas were strategic realists.
So they were prioritizing internal self-sufficiency above everything else.
Absolutely. Just think about the geography for a second.
Okay.
Chandrapura sits right near the crucial Kushavati river system. It's surrounded by exceptionally fertile land.
So food and water?
The basics. The Kadambas chose this site because its rice paddies and sustainable fresh water sources were perfect for sustaining a large, centralized population and administration, especially during times of conflict. Stability, not spectacle, drove that decision.
But I have to ask, if stability was the goal, wouldn't being so far inland kind of isolate them?
That's a great question.
I mean, wouldn't they be cut off from global ideas, from revenue? Wouldn't that eventually just choke the empire financially?
That's an important challenge to the model. But the sources show that geographers studying this region noted something key.
What's that?
The ability to control the staple crops, the rice, the local goods along the Kushavati. That was politically more valuable and way more stable than unpredictable short-term maritime trade.
Ah, I see.
So the Kadambas maintained their connection to global trade, but they did it by controlling the access points inland. They didn't put their vulnerable seat of government right on the exposed coast.
So they didn't ignore the coast, they just secured their foundational power first. They used Chandor as a kind of administrative fulcrum to manage everything.
Exactly, both agriculture and the inland trade routes. This choice allowed them to endure shifts in naval power, seasonal raiding, all the things that afflicted purely coastal settlements.
So when you walk through Chandor today,
You can feel it. The logic is subtly visible. The sources suggest the land use just feels intentional. It doesn't scream ancient power center, but the village structure itself, it reflects this foundational logic of control and resource management that sustained an empire for 400 years.
Okay, so moving from the political to the sacred. The next layer of Chandor's history seems to be revealed in its spiritual landscape.
Hmm.
And this is where that idea of continuity you mentioned really shines through, because these spaces, they weren't just abandoned.
No, they weren't. And this is where we transition from, say, political strategy to deep cultural history.
Hmm.
Chandor's sacred sites reveal these deep layers of continuous use that defy any simple timeline.
So what are we looking at specifically?
We're looking at temples dedicated to deities like Brahma, Kadamba, various really crucial village protector deities.
Mhm.
And the sources indicate these sites have been active religious ground for centuries.
You've mentioned before that archaeological patterns suggest that once a spot is designated sacred, it often stays that way.
It does.
But what makes Chandor's temples specifically so compelling?
I think it's the authenticity without performance.
What do you mean by that?
Well, unlike high-profile sites that become, archaeological parks for tourists, Chandor's temples are genuinely woven into the daily rhythm of life.
So they're still active.
Very active. We're
Yeah.
talking about temples where the architecture might have changed.
Yeah.
Maybe a rebuilding happened after a collapse, but the exact location and the spiritual purpose stayed constant. The temple bells ring for timekeeping and for actual worship by residents. It's their social calendar, not a tourist demonstration.
That's a powerful idea. The function stays constant even as rituals evolve. But was that continuity ever challenged? I mean, if the Kadambas were defeated, didn't the next powers, or, eventually the Portuguese, try to destroy these markers?
That's a sharp question. The sources suggest a much more complex historical reality. After the Kadambas, the region saw shifts, yeah. But since the political center of gravity moved to the coast under the Portuguese, Chandor's inland sacred sites weren't necessarily the primary target.
So they were just ignored by the new administration.
Often, yes. Which allowed the local community to just sustain them quietly. It was a kind of...
Resilience through marginalization.
Exactly. And that subtlety is encoded right into the temple design.
Yeah.
You have to ask, as traveler might, why does the Brahma temple face that direction? Why is Kandoba's shrine specifically elevated? This isn't random.
So what's the logic?
If we connect this back to the Kadamba logic, these questions link cosmology, landscape, and community survival.
Mm.
The sources confirm these sacred spaces were carefully placed right where the land and water, the fertility of the Kushavati system intersected.
Ah, okay.
The spiritual legitimacy of the community was tied directly back to the physical sustenance of the land. That's an anchor that even colonial shifts couldn't fully displace.
So the inland capital wasn't just about defense and food. It was about spiritual legitimacy anchored in the environment itself.
It's all interconnected.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
Let's jump forward a few centuries then to the political shift brought by Portuguese power. As you noted, the focus moved immediately to the coast.
Right, to Velagoa, Punjab.
And this drew Chandor's political status away. But the crucial insight from our sources is that Chandor didn't fall. It didn't empty out and become a ruin. It transformed.
And this is where the narrative of Goa gets truly interesting, because it fundamentally challenges that simplified story of, cultural rupture. What we see in Chandor is architectural coexistence, a physical record of negotiation.
Tell me more about that physical record.
The village became a visual palimpsest. So while Chandor lost its capital status, it retained its significance as a place where the powerful local Goan elite chose to build their homes.
And these were often Catholic converts or wealthy Hindu landowners cooperating with the new administration.
Exactly. And these Indo-Portuguese mansions, the symbols of this new, hybrid, powerful class, they rose up right alongside older temple land and sacred sites.
That layering is what makes Goa so distinctive, but in Chandor you're saying it's not just distinct, it's concentrated.
Absolutely concentrated. The most famous example the sources highlight is the Braganza House. It's one of the largest and most impressive Indo-Portuguese mansions in the entire area.
And where does it stand?
It stands quite literally next to, or on the edge of, land historically associated with ancient temple worship. The wall of this grand mansion sits right where the old sacred space begins.
Wow, that is such a vivid symbol. It really shows the past wasn't erased, it was integrated into the new reality.
Sometimes jarringly, often through necessity, it perfectly symbolizes adaptation and coexistence. The local elite, they had to navigate a foreign Catholic ruling power, yet they were financially secure and still retained these deep cultural roots.
So Chandor became a place where the past was built upon, not bulldozed.
That's it.
And that idea of history being a kind of living document you just keep adding to, that brings us to the domestic architecture itself. Those Indo-Portuguese mansions, they aren't just grand houses. The sources call them social documents.
They're powerful archives. They were built by elite Goan families who were navigating Portuguese rule while also, and this is critical, retaining their core local identity and their environmental knowledge.
Okay, so you see a blend.
A total blend. You have European aesthetics, like Baroque facades, formal reception rooms, with this deep, established Indian environmental intelligence.
And the intelligence is in the function, right? Give us an example of how that actually works in the heat of a Goan summer.
Oh, it's highly functional, not just stylistic. Environmental design studies have confirmed how effective the key features are.
So what are we talking about?
Imagine entering one of these homes on a humid 90-degree day and immediately feeling the temperature drop 10 degrees. That drop is achieved through massive stone floors, exceptionally high ceilings allowing heat to rise away, and the way the homes are sited to maximize cross-ventilation.
So those wide verandas and inner courtyards weren't just for show, they were essential passive cooling systems.
They were necessary technology. The inner courtyards would capture even the slightest breeze and circulate it through the house. The wide verandas, the balcon, provided deep shade. These elements enabled comfort in a tropical climate without any modern tech.
That's a powerful application of traditional knowledge. But the sources also suggest they reflect social structures. How literally did the architecture enforce social roles?
Quite literally. The architecture is basically a handbook on how the local elite managed to survive and thrive under foreign rule while maintaining a very strict domestic order.
So the layout encodes social values.
Visually, yes. The balcony at the front acted as a buffer, a space for public formality for greedy guests, but the transition from that public front room to the high-ceilinged internal courtyards enforced a balance between social openness and deep domestic privacy.
Meaning the physical design governed who could go where, reinforcing class distinctions and traditional gender roles within the family structure.
The house itself dictated behavior.
The space itself.
Precisely. A knowledgeable guide can help reveal that the design of the space, the placement of doors, the height of walls, the flow from the formal dining area to the private quarters, it tells the ongoing social history of negotiation and survival.
So when we put all of this together, the strategic logic of the Kadamba capital, the quiet resilience of the sacred sites, and the architectural intelligence of the colonial homes, what is the big takeaway?
I think Chandor matters because it resists easy categorization.
How so?
It shows us that Goa didn't simply begin with the arrival of ships, and its ancient identity didn't just disappear beneath colonial rule. The village preserves what we can call spatial memory.
Spatial memory, how does that memory manifest on the ground for someone visiting?
The logic of movement, of gathering, of territorial separation, it all remains structurally intact long after the original political or economic functions of those spaces have faded. The physical structure of the village itself is a deeply engraved timeline.
So it shows where the river was most fertile.
Where the sacred power was anchored.
And where the new money decided to assert its presence.
Exactly.
And here's where it gets really interesting for a visitor. The history isn't loud. Chandor doesn't explain itself on big interpretive signs.
Not at all.
The sources really emphasize that it's best understood slowly. On foot. You need a knowledgeable guide who can connect the dots for you.
You do. Someone connecting temple placement to agricultural land, the colonial homes to the ancient site, and tying it all back to that social hierarchy.
It truly turns what looks like just a quiet walk into an act of sustained historical discovery.
It does. The history wasn't preserved in a glass case. It was, and importantly still is, being lived today by the residents.
It really encourages you to slow down, to look for the subtle cues, and to realize that Goan history is just so much deeper and more complex than the coastal party town image often suggests.
Oh.
So, our final thought for you, the listener, is this. Chandor appears quiet and modest today, but its calm surface hides millennia of continuous, complex history, political, spiritual, and social. So next time you drive through a seemingly small, unassuming place, consider how many other communities in the world might actually be holding thousands of years of layered, breathing history just beneath that deceptively calm surface. It's a compelling thought to mull over and explore on your own.
If you decide to travel to Goa, we have a recommendation. Five Senses Tours organizes tours across India, which are immersive cultural experiences. You can email contact@fivesensestours.com. Note 5 is written as a numeral in contact at fivesensestours.com or WhatsApp to +919-845-677-446.